We'll go now directly into our program tonight, and we're going to have with us 3 school teachers who had taught in rural schools in the area. And if you notice these, well, they look like, and what they are is there's pictures pasted onto window shades. Marie Olsen, who is going to speak tonight, when she taught in Orr School, she had the kids make these pictures and write this story that's on these pages. So it's kind of interesting to see that we have her. And then we also have Doris Jean Larson, and I understand she's going to talk about when her mother-in-law was a school teacher. Am I right? And Lily died several years ago at 107, so you know when she was a school teacher. And then Jeanette Ramstrom started out in the rural schools, but she ended up in this school for many years. So she was involved in the closing of the schools of the area. And when they come back into the one local area. So tonight we'll start with Marie. Do you want to come up here, Marie? She also taught for 9 years above the Arctic Circle in the Yukon Territory. Is it Yukon?
No, in Alaska.
Up in Alaska. And she's going to tell us a little bit about teaching in Alaska, but she's also going to talk about her years here in Polk County when she taught at Orr and Bass Lake. Wolf Creek? Oh, anymore. So, here you are, Marie.
Do I need this?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know we're getting old when our former students have had 50th wedding anniversaries. In the 40s, first I started teaching at Bass Lake, and then it was the Orr School, and then it was Centuria. And then I got married, and I decided I'd stay home for. Then I decided I'd stay home for 10 years.
Hold it up closer to you.
And then,
hold it closer to you. There.
okay, there, now I can hear.
Yeah, now it's going.
And then after that, I was at the Wolf Creek, Orr School and the Wolf Creek School. And some of the things that are memorable, there's a lot of things, but I can't tell them all or I'd be here for hours. And at the Wolf Creek School, I remember that the 2 rooms were combined the year that I came. So I think it was, I don't remember if it was 8 grades or 7 grades. I think it was in the Orr School, it was 7 grades. I remember the children enjoyed sliding in the wintertime, and they liked to slide down the hill by the school, but I knew that there was this creek down there, and they could happen to go into it. So they could, if their parents wrote a letter saying that they gave permission, I wouldn't be responsible. So only twice did somebody go in the river, and I took one home to get dry clothes, and I got clothes for the other one at my house, so got them fixed up. And I remember that they liked to play their ball games. And the students were good. I can only remember 2 behavior problems, and that's not bad. And at the Orr School, I remember the students loved ball games. And I remember Veda Orr was the cook. And in connection with that, we had chili one day. And I remember Paul Johnson wasn't used to eating chili. He didn't like it, and he wasn't going to eat it. He said he could not stand the beans. And so I told him that he would not taste the beans if he would hold his nose each time he ate a bean. And so I happened to have a movie camera there, and I took a picture of his tray and the clock every 15 minutes. By 2:30, he had it all eaten. And then when he was in high school in Vansbrook, I noticed at the lunch table, he was just scooping it in. And I said, "Say, Paul, when did you ever get to like chili?" Then later on, I saw him at a graduation party some years later, and I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "The same thing you used to do, trying to get kids to eat." He said, "I'm working at a Bible camp." And I remember we had school programs there, and that was always interesting. I don't remember anything about the programs, but it was fun for them to have little plays and songs, and they enjoyed that. just thought I'd mention those things. And the students were all very good. They did their best, as far as I could tell. One day, a supervising teacher came to the OR school, and she had made up a test for the students. One of the questions was, "What's your telephone number?" Well, I didn't blame them for not knowing of their phone number, because I hardly could remember mine. They had changed it 3 times just in the last few months. Then I was at after the OR school closed. See, I was at the OR school after I was at Wolf Creek, and then I went to Vansburg after that for about 7 years, back in the 60s. And then I was at Centuria, I was at Taylor's Falls for 7 years. And then after that, I went up to Alaska, sort of camping, and I thought, well, I'd stay for an extended camping trip for a cross-cultural learning experience. And I thought I'd stay a year. Well, I did stay that year, but I had to go back because they gave me a leave of absence. And then the next year I went back up there after that. You maybe can't see these, but that wasn't so long ago, so I can remember the children pretty well. Remember, Bobby Gail James was in the 1st grade, and now she's working in the office at the school. Mimi Thomas was in the 1st grade. She was very shy, and the doctor came to school one day to give them the children their vaccinations. She was not going to have anybody vaccinate her, but she had to go through with it, and I had to help hold her down so that could get done. Now, this picture was taken, I don't have a picture of her when she was in the 1st grade with me. I just happened to have a few. This was taken this past summer, and she was working like a game warden for the wildlife for the state. And over a year ago, there was a picture of her in the newspaper. There were students going out on archaeological digs, and she was going along with her gun to help protect them from the wild animals, and the moose and the bears. And the summer before last, she called me, and she just got back from Washington, D.C. She had been asked to come out there to help guard the Department of the Interior for 2 weeks. They asked her to join the FBI, but she did not want to. She wanted to stay living in Alaska. And the name of her job was Tactical Techniques Technician. This little 1st grade girl doing beadwork. They did a lot of beadwork, and we had some classes at the school. And Charlotte Alexander, I'm just showing this to you because I remember them when they were little, but she is now teaching at the school. And I took students out to show them how to set rabbit snares. Yeah, you can hear it. Okay. So, these don't show very well. And then the next day we went out and got the rabbit out of the snare. And a little boy in the 2nd grade started building a log cabin, but the next week the big boys came and knocked it all down. Watching the sled dog races, they're dressed warm in their sled. The children are outside for our music class. I took the kids all out for some dances and singing their songs. Then we had a little marshmallow roast. And this was the territorial school in Fort Dubon before the other state school was built. And the homes were mostly made of logs long ago. And this is the churches. There were 2 Baptist churches, an Assembly church, and an Episcopal church. The Episcopal church is the oldest one because the English came through there first. And this is Irving Hollingwood for the church. The Sourdough Inn was the hotel in town, and the only one most of the time. Sarah used to work there in the evenings as a waitress and dishes and things for a few hours each evening when we lived close to it. The logs and the boards for this hotel were brought down from Eagle and then to Circle, and then they were brought down the river to Fort Yukon. About 2 years ago, it was advertised for sale, but maybe 3 years ago, and then it burned the next year. So it's not there anymore. When I went back to visit once, I called and asked if they were open, and they said, no, they weren't open, but we'll be open for you. And then I stayed there, and then the other people came and said, you could have stayed at our houses. And the crocus came grew in the springtime, just like dandelions grow around here. This morning, Alberta brought me some real crocuses that were up out here. So, this is just the picture back in '72, picking cotton grass. And you can't see this very good, this is just barrel. They were dressed in warm clothing in the middle of July, because it would be maybe 32 degrees. There were a lot of dog teams. There were more dogs in the village than people sometimes. But the big dogs could not run around, or the puppies could. If they saw loose dogs running around, they would get shot. And the fish eggs, they would hang up to dry, and on racks or fences, they're often used to supplement dog rations. The Army base or DEW line was there for most of the time that we were there, and it's a radar station showing any airplanes that are up in the area at all. It's for sort of a defense protection. And they did a lot of bead work, and then sometimes there was a bad flood in '49, and the one in the '80s was quite bad too. The water was deep, and the porch, this is not my house, this is the house across from where we lived. The porch washed off of our house, and a government building half a block away, their toilet, their outhouse, flooded into the street in front of our house. It's just flood pictures. And big ice chunks would come, and we took the dogs in boats to get them uptown into the higher ground. No. I don't do this. All right, now, if you're interested in history, some people aren't. I was not the first years of college. I did not take history. I was afraid of dates and learning too much of those things. But afterward, I did take history, and I happened to teach history for quite a few years. I remember one student in Grantsburg came to school in the fall, and he said, what in the world do we have to take history for? There's no good in that. And I said, I'm so glad you asked that, because I know 17 very important reasons why you need to study history. We'll talk about them now, and then we'll list them on the board, and then tomorrow we'll have a test on those. I'm sure he wished he had never asked or commented. In 1740, it was when Vitus Bering discovered Alaska. That's a long time ago. He was a Dane, but he was hired by the Russians. So you've heard of the Bering Sea, I'm sure. And then in 1867, the United States purchased Alaska from Russia. The Russians had brought in liquor. A lot of the Russian-American company workers were convicts from Siberia. They liked to get sea otters, and they would give nails for the sea otters, oftentimes. One time, some Russian hunting parties got 2,000 Morsky Boprov, that's the sea otters over there. They got 2,000 in one trip. The Russians traded with the natives there. This is not Fort Yukon now, this is farther west. They traded kettles, tobacco, cloth, needles, beads, and later on they gave them traps, matches, axes, and guns. In 1867, the Russians and the English both quit trading along the Yukon. and an American trading firm did good business in a moneyless land. There were some villages in Alaska, maybe between over 60 years ago, where they used no money at all. I talked to one lady who lived in one village, and she said nobody used any money. They just traded for whatever they wanted. But the Indians had lived a hard life, much like their Stone Age ancestors. But now it's different. They have the churches and neat houses, jobs, stores, and airplane service. Now, the people who came across the Bering Straits were like the Mongolians. They came to Alaska. And the people up there are four main groups. The Eskimos, who live in the Bering Sea in the Arctic area, and the Athabascan Indians in the interior, the Aleuts on the Aleutian Islands, and the Tlinkits, Haida, and Tsimshian are down around the Panhandle. And it was 1912, it was a territory, and Alaska is 1/5 the size of the whole United States. And Seward, who was Secretary of State, I believe, was interested in getting Alaska purchased. They called it Seward's Folly, and we paid $7,200,000 for it. That's 2 cents an acre. And the transfer was made in October 1867. And in 1898, there was the gold rush. Then 30,000 people came up trying to get gold and hoping to get rich. Then there were steamboats on the Yukon River until 1955. If you fall in the Yukon River, you drown fast because there's so much silt in the water. I remember one time flying over some of the rivers, and there were some tourists on this airplane, and they said, "Oh, look at those rivers down there. They're all dried up," because they look brown from the airplane, but it was just because there was so much silt in the water. And then in 1942, the Alaska Highway was built. It was Alexander Murray who came over to the villages, and they were interested in getting marten skins and other skins, and they, it was the Hudson's Bay Company that really started Fort Yukon. And there's still a graveyard there, and some of the Hudson's Bay people were buried there like even 100 years ago. It was 1914 when President Wilson signed a bill to construct the Alaska Railroad. And then in 1923, it was completed. And President Harding came up there and drove the Golden Spike. He stopped and visited in Talkeetna on the way up, and he was at the lodge there, and so the story got out that he got sick and got food poisoning at this lodge. That's Talkeetna is north of Anchorage. But actually, he had been sick, very sickly before he came up there. There were territorial governors there to start with, and appointed by the different presidents through Eisenhower. And then in 1906, they were able to send delegates to the House of Representatives, but they didn't have any votes, when it was a territory. During the Crimean War, in the middle of the 1800s, the czars in Russia were afraid of attacks by Great Britain or the Americans. And between 1800 and 1850, the Russians made a lot of round-the-world trips and trips over there. The Russian-American Company, from 1798 until 99, administered the Russian territories in America. And they had a monopoly. Nothing was to be produced, sold, or bought without their permission. And the serfs were freed to settle in America after Tsarism started to be done away with, more so. Now, Fort Yukon, where we were at, on the farthest north of the Yukon River. It's 8 miles north of the Arctic Circle. In the summer, there's lots of light. There is one day when the sun doesn't set. And in the winter, if you want to get a good picture outdoors during the last week of December or the first week of January, you better be sure to get out between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock during the day. And they used to have there was a joke that if you go on a night on the town, it would last for 2 months up there. And Fort Yukon was, there was a joke, yeah. As far as the Hudson Bay Company ever got was there. And in 1847, it took them 3 years to get their trading goods across from England to that settlement. And it's accessible only by air or water. Before there was plumbing in the 1980s, it was called semi-primitive. Irving hauled a lot of water for the airport and the store, the university, homes. And long ago, they said that they needed teachers in the villages, and they weren't really fussy. All you needed was a pulse, but things have changed later on. Some of the teachers, even though they would pay well in certain areas, don't like to be in those places because they miss their city amenities. They want McDonald's and restaurants and places, things like that. So, Fort Yukon is the oldest community in interior Alaska, and as I said, Alexander Murray was the trader from Hudson Bay who started it there. The fort was 46 by 26 feet, and it had 5 rooms in it, and they had a stockade. They built it because they were afraid of the Russians coming over that far, and it was to protect themselves against the Russians. And it was a real good trapping area. And 2 years after the United States bought Alaska, the Hudson Bay Company, English, had to move out of there, and they went up to Rampart House, further up the river. There are many gold miners, fur traders came by, and they stopped to rest, eat, and trade, and buy things. Then the Episcopal Church built a hospital there in 1914, and then that got to be a clinic. There's a new clinic there now. One of the early missionaries there was Hudson Stuck. One time he got stuck in the river up towards Circle, I heard, and somebody came by and they asked him, "What's your name?" And he said, "Hudson Stuck." And they said, "Well, we can see you're stuck, but what's your name?" In 1949, the lower village was destroyed from the flood, and people moved up on the hill to Crowtown, where there's a community center now, school, state building, store, church, and post office. In the 80s, when they had the bad flood, I think I can only remember one house that they lost that floated down the river, and they found it many miles down the Yukon River. In 1949, they got in a power plant for electricity. I told people when I came there, and before I went there, that the thing that I would hate the most about living in a village is the noise from their generators. And Marion Nicholson told me, she says, "You'll hate it when you don't hear that noise." And then for a couple of years we lived right across. We lived in a house owned by the utilities. Irving fixed it up. He fixed up a bathroom and painted it and had a nice kitchen. It was very nice. And I got used to it. It just sounded like a tractor running, just like you're on a farm. But the first time we ever went up there to look at the place, before I ever knew I was going there, we walked by this old post office, and then there was a shed next to it, and I teased Irving, and they said, "If we ever move up here, here's an old shed you could fix up for a house." And then in 1958, it was the state school, and then I mentioned Air Force early warning site that was started there in 1955. Velma Wallace was a young lady. I didn't have her in school. She was already through high school, I think, when I came there. But she has written 3 books. She wrote Raising Ourselves, Bird Girl, and Two Old Women. Some of you may have heard of the book Two Old Women. It really sold well, and it was printed in 18 different languages. It's about how it used to be long ago when the people, they didn't even have villages. They would be traveling here and there in the woods hunting. And then if somebody got sick or was dying, they had no choice but to just leave them. That's all they did, because they had all they could do to take care of themselves. So if you ever see their book, Two Old Women, you would enjoy reading it. Now the oldest lady I knew up there was Belle Herbert. Well, she was from Chukitzik, but I took some pictures of her when she was in Fort Yukon. The governor came up to see her on her birthday when she was 127 years old. She died when she was 128, and she really told a lot about how it was, how hard life was long ago when they go out with their dog teams, and they lived on, rabbits and moose and caribou, and, well, there were just many hardships out there. There's just so many things here, I won't take time to mention them, but they're very interesting. And one time she said, now we just, she was talking to her granddaughter, she said, now we just eat all kinds of stuff, and people just die off. That's the way it seems to me. And she did a lot of nice sewing when she got older. When she was young and growing up, just took all their time just living and getting rabbits and food to eat. One time, there was a newscaster, Terry Drinkwater. I think he was from California, and he's dead now, but he was a national news broadcaster. And he came up to do a story on the effect of television on the people, and the students, and the children especially. And I just happened to have this one picture down here. Irving hauled him around the town so he could get into a few homes and see what it was like. Before we had television day and night, they used to have just a few television programs, and they were shut off quite early in the evening. But I noticed the children were a lot more sleepy after they got the TV, and it was on all night. And I had each child draw the back of their head, and I did the front of their head. And then they wrote down their favorite TV program. And this one wrote, I like to watch Charlie's Angels. It is good. Shared treats. So, I think the churches used wood for their heat. And the people caught fish in their fish reels and nets. You wouldn't be able to use a hook and line in the Yukon River, but you could if you belonged up to the Black River, the Shinjik, or a lot of the other rivers, and maybe even the Porcupine. I think I talked too long.
Oh, just before you leave here, when I was in 5th grade, Marie Olsen was my teacher in Wolf Creek School. By the way, can you tip that clock up there, Donna? That clock was the one in the room where we watched, my brother Barvin particularly watched it. It would tick-tock, and you'd watch the hand go slowly. So that's what he did that year. And but anyway, Mrs. Olsen was our teacher, and she'd sometimes come a little bit late. She had 5 kids, probably, well, maybe 3 or 4 at that time at home. She'd come in just about 8 o'clock with her Jeep, roar into the yard. We all scattered out of the way so that we wouldn't get run over. And she'd come in with the Jeep and open up the school, and we'd all go in. And the year that she came was also the year that we got indoor toilets, so that was a real exciting experience. And we also had collapsed from 2 rooms into 1 room, so it was kind of a big a big thing, and it was kind of the school had gotten quite a bit smaller. Every neighborhood has to have an adventurous person in it, and Mrs. Olsen was our adventurous person. She went to Alaska for her, after most of us would be thinking about retirement, she went up there. She was into 4-H with us. You see I'm taking these pictures and everything. Well, she was the mentor for the photography project in the 4-H, because she always, wherever she went, she had the camera, did her own darkroom stuff, still has it, took pictures of everything. Probably half the pictures, not only all these pictures she developed in that, but a lot of the pictures of the Bass Lake School and other schools are taken by her when she was at the school. She has a movie of when the Nevers Dam went out, so she had all of those things back when we were still, you know, people weren't doing all of that stuff. So she has a lot of things, a lot of adventures going on. Right now, she hasn't quit because she has an email account, and she said, well, I don't use my darkroom very much anymore because I can scan pictures in and do a better job on that. So she hasn't stopped on the things. We want to recognize all of the things she's done for our community and all of the schools she taught in by an appreciation award from our history group. So thank you.
If anyone wants to learn a foreign language, I have some Cushing dictionary. And the pictures on the one table there are some when the kids were making Indian plays up at the Orr School. I don't know where I put them, but they're around on some of the paper.
Thank you, Marie. We appreciate what you did.